Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Jo Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Great to be with you this week. Today's topic for conversation is how to reflect effectively as a coach. And we are talking about this because it was suggested to us as a podcast episode by people in our coaching crowd, and also because it's a core coaching competency around understanding self and understanding others. So today we're going to talk about different approaches to be able to reflect effectively, how we do it, what our learnings have been, and we'll see what comes out organically in the conversation.
Yeah, I think reflective practice is sometimes the unsung hero of coaching. We do a couple of modules on it on our program because of the importance that it plays in being able to be a great coach. And the reality is that unless you're able to see the different layers of psychodynamics, I suppose, that happen both within you and between you and the client and what is happening in the system, it's really going to limit the ability for you to be able to coach. So the better you are at reflecting and using reflective practice, I believe the better coach you are ultimately. And so for me, reflective practice is a really important part of learning how to coach well and being an effective coach.
Yeah, I mean, it helps you to make better decisions as a coach. It enables you to access learning, to grow and develop as a coach, and to integrate that into your future practice. It can give you peace of mind, after a session, so that you can leave the session, in that time slot for the session and not carry it around with you for the days afterwards. So it really helps you to emotionally regulate yourself, because the work we do is emotional. We are holding and creating spaces, safe spaces for people emotionally, and reflective practice, as opposed to like a one-off reflection. I think we should be clear probably that we're talking about that here, that this is about engaging in a regular activity and practice of reflection, capturing those reflections in whatever way works best for you, and then being able to identify learning and apply that learning so you can move forward in a healthy way as a coach.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of benefit to reflective practice, isn't there? And I guess as we're talking about, let's build a little bit more on what reflective practice is. You've alluded there to it being a habit. And there's lots of different ways, of course, that you can create habits around reflective practice. So obviously, when you come and train on a coach, you're going to be keeping a reflective journal of your coaching sessions and reflecting on, what worked and what didn't work and what did you learn and what will you do differently, and writing that out. But as you move beyond your coaching training, your reflective practice habits might look very different. So for me, my reflective practice happens when I'm typing up my client notes. So I'll finish my session, type up my client notes, and take a moment as I'm writing up those notes to notice what I notice, be it within myself, something that is emerging from the process of kind of re-experiencing that coaching session and writing those up. I also kind of pay attention, I guess, whilst it's not a habit, it's a skill that I've developed. So if I'm noticing that I'm cooking dinner and a client is popping into my head, I'm there and I'm asking myself, how come that's happening? How come this client session is no longer contained to the client session, but I'm now thinking about my client when I'm preparing dinner for the family? And so I am always paying attention to, I suppose, the energy around the client work that I'm doing, where it's showing up and when it's showing up, and making sure I create space to capture that, which I then take on to supervision. And we can talk all about supervision in just a moment. How do you reflect, Jo? How does it work for you?
Well, there is that difference between reflecting in action in the session, in those micro moments where I'm making a decision as to whether I stay silent, do I ask a question, do I challenge, do I reframe, etc., etc. So what skills am I drawing on? Where are we going? How are we doing in our relationship together? Do I share an observation? All of those things. And then there is what you were talking about there, which is reflecting on my actions. And it's very similar to you. Yeah, it's writing up the notes. I think I also engage in reflection around what am I grateful for. So even if the session feels like if a client hasn't had an amazing breakthrough and maybe I'm feeling a bit confused about, I don't know, I'm just holding some confusion maybe from the session. How did we get there? Did we make progress? How come the time went so quickly? Did we achieve what the client set out to achieve from that session? How do I feel about that? So I think it's like a centering around, what am I grateful for? What am I feeling? Did I ask for feedback? What feedback did I receive? Have I accepted that feedback, or am I noticing that I'm rejecting that feedback? How do I feel about what the client wants to focus on in the next session? Is there anything I want to capture that I want it? So from my reflections, what do I want to share with my client from those reflections in the next session? So capturing a bit of that so that it's already a bit of preparation really for the next session. And there is that kind of overlap between reflection and preparation for me, and noticing themes in my work. I think I also take a step back. So I tend, with my coaching practice, I tend to coach people on a particular day of the week, because I coach 8 people at a time at the moment, not in one day, but I do coach them on a particular day of the week normally. And I like to reflect on what themes are coming up, and am I playing a role in the themes that are coming up, and what am I learning about myself and what's happening in my world in that way, or what am I noticing that people generally are experiencing at the moment. And I also then reflect on, what do we talk about in our podcast? Is there themes here to talk about that? What am I learning beyond the coaching, but about my coaching business, and what can I share with our communities about that? So there's lots of those things, and I often will go for a walk to kind of mark the end of my coaching mode, if you like, for that day, and just kind of walk along in my own thoughts and sort of let it, or imagine things floating away, so if I notice that there is some residue, maybe a client has shared something with me that was a surprise for me to hear, that doesn't then just, that's the session, then I know, okay, I just need to spend a bit more time, on my own, or maybe I want to research something, maybe I feel like there's something that could be useful to share with them, or to draw my own knowledge. So I don't have a set process. It's kind of a semi-structured approach to reflective practice.
Yeah, and I'm hearing you talk a lot there around energy, and I think we get questions a lot from people who are training as a coach. How do you leave a coaching session? How do you just put a coaching session down? And I think, as you've described there, kind of going out in nature, and I think for me it is often about grounding activities, just being able to take a moment either after each client or at the end of the day to just check in, like, how am I feeling? What is happening for me? Where am I feeling that in my body? How come I'm holding on to it? Is there something I need to learn there? Is there a need that I have that I need to acknowledge? But you know what? As we ask those questions, they're all reflective practice questions, aren't they? Where am I feeling it in my body? What is the need that I have here? How come I can't let that go? These are all questions that through experience we have learned to ask ourselves, so that we can take what is useful from the reflection and be able to put it down and leave it. And I think if you're one of those coaches who, is leaving a coaching session and carrying some stuff around, it's about going back to your reflective practice routines, habits. Maybe you don't have them yet, or maybe it's an area that you're looking to develop in, and finding yourself, perhaps it's 3 or 4 set questions that you can remember to work through at the end of each day that you're coaching, or at the end of each session, that will help you to really unpick, unpack, and let go of whatever might have happened in that session. And then these aren't just heavy emotions, some of them can be really positive as well. It can have just as much impact to walk into the kitchen and be like, oh, I had this amazing client today, and want to tell everyone about it. But of course you can't really do that. You can talk obviously about the great day that you've had, but you don't want to be feeling the urge to share all your client stories outside of that coaching space either, because that's just as hard to limit yourself to do as it is to be able to unpack the stuff that might feel heavier. So the reflective practice is a really important part of being able to leave coaching sessions in the coaching container.
Yeah, reflective practice, I think, can be thought of as a chore, and it's really not a chore. It is about your emotional well-being and your competence development as a coach. And you can get quite efficient at it as you kind of get more and more experienced in your practice, and you'll be able to more easily identify the things that you want to take to supervision. And on that more positive aspect, I start the group supervision sessions that I do with, what are you celebrating in your coaching practice right now? And often people need to stop and reflect in the moment and think, oh, actually, what am I celebrating? Because we're so used to working with gaps and deficits rather than strengths. And it's really important to notice and celebrate those. And when we're stepping away from a coaching session, reflective practice really is about our ability to think and connect with things that have happened. So in the past, we are thinking about them in the here and now. And then we are also thinking about what's the learning that we're going to take forwards. And that takes a bit of practice to be able to do that and actually stay in the present. And there is a very important role of feedback within reflective practice. This isn't all about just our own internal self-referencing and judgments about things. It is about us being able to get feedback on what we have said and done and how we have been and the impact that it has had on the other or the relationship or the outcomes. And I really love the question. I often ask this at the moment in my coaching practice, which is, how would you like to close your session today? And in asking that question, it also prompts me to think about, and how do I want to close the session with the client today? And so to get feedback, you don't have to ask, what's your feedback? There's lots of different questions you can ask that will elicit feedback. And, often the client will say, I just want to say thank you for whatever it is that they want to thank, me as the coach for. So we're stepping into gratitude, and then I can share what I've noticed, with the client, the progress that they've made and so on. And that helps me to kind of close the session and then move more into that reflective space. And, another important factor as I think about it is like my desk, where it's placed, the view I have in front of me. I know that I'm lucky enough to live near the sea and I have a view of the sea. I know that helps me to reflect. So whatever you know about yourself, what are the environments that enable you to reflect easily and actively? That could be walking in the woods. It could be hearing a motorway outside of your window. It might having that kind of more like white noise kind of thing can help you maybe to get into that state that enables you to reflect effectively.
Yeah, and as I was listening to you chat there, I think we're touching on like different places where you can reflect. You've obviously got the self lens, reflecting on how was I in that coaching session? How were the interventions that I introduced? Did I do that well? Could I have done it better? That's all the self. And then there's the others piece. Now, how is my client? How was my client showing up today? What was their energy like? Did I respond well to that? So there's the information that your client brings. Then there's the what is happening between you and your client. So how was our relationship today? Was anything different, unusual, special? You can reflect on the happenings between you. And then there's obviously the systemic lens. So what is happening beyond me, my client, the relationship that we have that is coming into the coaching space? So there's so much reflection that you could do. Sometimes that can be overwhelming in terms of, gosh, do I have to reflect on all of that like all the time? And of course you don't. You can pick different aspects to reflect at different times with different clients. It's really about what brings you joy, what is useful to you in your coaching practice. Perhaps sitting down at some point to do like a holistic reflection of actually not just one client, but your client work as a whole. Like, how are you reflecting on how you're responding to all of your clients? And that will, as you've alluded to there, like give you thoughts around what you take to supervision. And supervision for me is another place of reflective practice. So I remember a few sessions ago, my supervisor said, "Oh, do you notice how you bring a lot of male clients to supervision?" And I was like, no, like I hadn't realized that at all. And that opened up a new door of reflection of like, oh, this is interesting. Like, is there anything in here? You know, so we had a look around and there were a few insights that were really useful for practice. But then it also encouraged me to think about taking my female clients, and which opens up new reflective opportunities. So you don't always have to do it alone either, I think, is the other thing. Supervision is great for being able to reflect with somebody else. But also, if supervision isn't the only place, having peer coaches and a network of other coaches is a great place to reflect as well.
Yeah, I love going to supervision and being asked questions that really make me stop in my tracks, and where the questions just feel brand new, or there's an observation that I was totally unaware of. I love that, and I love exploring that. And so, you know, we sometimes find it easy to shift between perspectives ourselves when we're reflecting, and other times we perhaps reach the limit of that, and we really benefit from having new perspective and objective perspective on things. And we need to watch out for when we become defensive in our reflective practice. And that can happen easily to all of us. How do you notice that? But reflecting effectively means having an awareness, like, am I being defensive? So we often talk on our coaching training about being able to kind of drop down through levels of reflection, that initially people come and they're able to reflect at quite a basic level. But then when we start going through the different lenses and depths of reflective practice, really what enables that is us to be able to suspend our self-judgment and be courageous in walking pathways with our thoughts and reflections when we don't know where they're going to lead. And it might lead us to a whole big piece of self-work that we might want to engage in for ourselves and as effective practitioners. But I think for a lot of coaches, we coach because we have that learner strength as well as value. And so it's kind of food for the soul for us. But initially, it's quite scary. And what training to be a coach demands is the ability to critically reflect. And of course, that element of critical reflection is can trigger people around that the defensiveness, especially when.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think that critical reflection piece is also about curiosity, you know, so, example of the differences. So a reflection might be, oh, I noticed that my client was low in energy. And so I made sure that I took my time to match my client's pace and ask, questions that ease them into the session. And the session worked out really well. Like that's that's interesting. But a critical reflection is like, how did you manage to do that in the first place? So how did you manage to spot that your client's energy was low? How did you manage to match the pace? And how did you know that matching the pace was the right thing to do in that moment there and then with your client? It's like another level of interrogation around your actions, and not for the sake of it, but more because that's where the learning is. So I noticed that my client's energy was low. I noticed that my client's energy was low because I'd taken time to check in with my own energy before I went to the session. And so I was perceptive to it. I thought about matching pace because I noticed that my client was speaking with a low energy and I wanted the rapport to be strong between us. It's just being able to really tune in to, why do you do the things that you do? And when you do the things that you do, how do you know that they're having an impact? And when you can get to that level of reflection, that's going to really enable you to, supercharge your coaching skills. And yes, you may come across some places where you need to do your own inner work. But often it's also about discovery, and learning, like, wow, gosh, like I didn't know that I did that, or I didn't know that that was there. Like, what a great thing to be able to now replicate in other sessions. So it's also, I think, unpeeling layers of strength as much as it is discovering places where you may need to do some growth.
Yeah, and you might also have questions around in your reflections around what else did I consider doing? And if you didn't consider doing anything else, then that's a point of view, isn't there? Because there's always a number of options and things that you could do. So what else could you have considered if you didn't have a range to consider from? And then in your reflections on your actions, what could I have missed when I was focusing on the client's energy? And so, it's taken the broader lenses beyond the obvious. What were the skills that I was using in the moment that worked effectively? What was I drawing on? What else could have been influencing my client at the time? Why is it I was noticing their energy? Why was that important to me above everything else when the client had brought other things? And so having that real hungry curiosity, it kind of moves the reflections beyond the client more to self, which then leads us to thinking about how we might show up with other clients. And that critical reflection is also around, like, how well did the thing I did, how well did it impact the coaching session? And whilst with this client, what I did worked well, I recognized that with another client who might have had this particular dynamic or history, that might not have worked so effectively. And that's the ability to recognize that it's never a one size fits all. And so we need to take into account a range of different factors. Now, reflective practice could get exhausting because there is that essence of it, which is it is never ending, and it could be a bit like a rabbit hole. And that's where having your supervisor, having your peer coaches to temper that and ensure that your Be Perfect driver isn't showing up is really important from a resiliency perspective. So taking one aspect of your coaching practice and reflecting thoroughly on it is a good place to start for effective reflective practice as a coach.
Yeah, and also have some patience, because if you are starting out on your coaching journey, it's a skill. Like all of the other skills in coaching, developing your reflective practice muscle can take time and energy. And the more you do it, the more you see, the more you see, the more you see. So there's a lot of layers to that. So have some patience with it. And if you are, new to the coaching world and listening to this thinking, oh, that sounds intriguing, there's lots of different ways you can learn more about coaching. One would be to buy our book, which is Deciding to Coach. You can join our community, the coaching crowd. You can check out our courses on our website. And obviously, you keep listening to the podcast. And if you've enjoyed today's podcast, please do like and subscribe and leave us a review so we can hear your thoughts. That would be great.